taking shelter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, translated with purports by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, said that this Bhagavatam is like the sun in the age of darkness, gives light. Bhagavata Purāṇa. The illusion is insurmountable. It's a perfect arrangement of illusion. And the only way out of the illusion is with the light coming from the personality of Godhead, who is the source of everything. So by hearing attentively the message of Bhagavatam, the illusion that we identify with this temporary situation, temporary world, temporary body, temporary material energy, manifestation of the material energy is temporary. That's what creates the illusion, is that we identify with this material body, material mind. We try to find happiness by arranging and rearranging the material energy. And if it doesn't work out in one life, then we get another life to try again. We're never successful for very long. Because it all has a beginning and an end. But that goes against our desires. Our very nature is that there be no interruption to our activities when we identify with our spiritual body in loving service to the Lord. Then there's no interruption. So, taking shelter of the Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And we're starting the 5th canto. This is chapter 1. It's a little summary here. The activities of Maharaj Priyavrata. This chapter describes how King Priyavrata enjoyed royal opulence and majesty, and then returned to full knowledge. King Priyavrata was detached from worldly opulence, and then he became attached to his kingdom. But finally, he again became detached from material enjoyment and thus achieved liberation. When King Parikshit heard about this, he was struck with wonder, but he was somewhat bewildered as to how a devotee with no attachment for material enjoyment could later become attached to it. Thus, in astonishment, he questioned Sukadeva Goswami about this. In response to the king's inquiries, Sukadeva Goswami said that devotional service, being transcendental, cannot be deviated by any material influences. Priyavrata had received transcendental knowledge from the instructions of Narada, and therefore he did not want to enter a materialistic life of enjoyment in a kingdom. He accepted the kingdom, however, at the request of such superior demigods as Lord Brahma, Lord Indra, the King of Heaven. Everything is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Controller, and everyone must work accordingly. Just as a bull is controlled by a rope tied to its nose, so all conditioned souls are forced to work under the spells of the modes of nature. A civilized man, therefore, works according to the institution of Varna and Ashram. Even in materialistic life, however, one is free to act. Everyone is compelled to accept, I read that wrong, really wrong. Should read, even in materialistic life, however, no one is free to act. Everyone is compelled to accept a certain type of body offered by the Supreme Lord, and thus be allotted different grades of happiness and distress. Therefore, even if one artificially leaves home and goes to the forest, he again becomes attached to materialistic life. Family life is compared to a fortress for practicing sense control. When the senses are controlled, one may live either at home or in the forest, and there's no difference. When Maharaj Priyavrata, following the instruction of Lord Brahma, accepted the royal throne, his father Manu left home for the forest. Maharaj Priyavrata then married Bhāhishmati, the daughter of Vishvakarma. In the womb of Bhāhishmati, he begot 10 sons, named Agnidra, Idmajiva, Yagnabahu, Mahavira, Hiranyareta, Gritaprishta, Shravana, Medatishti, Itihotra, and Kavi. He also begot 1 daughter, whose name was Rajasvati. Maharaj Priyavrata lived with his wife and family for many thousands of years. The impressions from the rims of Maharaj Priyavrata's chariot wheels created 7 oceans and 7 islands. Of the 10 sons of Priyavrata, 3 sons named Kavi, Mahavira, and Savana accepted sannyas, the 4th order of life. The remaining 7 sons became the rulers of the 7 islands. Maharaj Priyavrata also had a second wife, in whom he begot 3 sons named Uttama, Raivata, and Tamasa. All of them were elevated to the post of Manu. Sukadeva Goswami thus described how Maharaj Priyavrata achieved liberation. Text 1. King Parikshit inquired from Sukadeva Goswami, O great sage, why did King Priyavrata, who was a great self-realized devotee of the Lord, remain in household life, which is the root cause of the bondage of karma, fruit of activities, and which defeats the mission of human life? The word parabhava in the verse is also significant. When one is satisfied in family life, he's doomed, because he must already have forgotten his relationship with the Lord. Prahlad Maharaj describes how the activities of family life implicate one more and more. Household life is like a dark well. If one falls into this well, his spiritual death is assured. How Priyavrata Maharaj remained a liberated Paramahamsa even within family life is described in the next verse. Devotees are certainly liberated persons. Therefore, O greatest of the Brahmins, they cannot possibly be absorbed in family affairs. Only by executing devotional service can one appreciate me, Krishna. Similarly, Krishna says in the Gita, simply by discharging devotional service, one can understand me. Thus, for a bhakta to become attached to family affairs is impossible, since a bhakta and his associates are liberated, everyone searching after ananda or bliss. But in the material world, there can never be any bliss. It's only possible in devotional service. Attachment for family affairs and devotional service are incompatible. Therefore, Maharaj Parikshit was somewhat surprised to hear that Maharaj Priyavrata was simultaneously attached to devotional service and to family life. Elevated Mahatmas who have taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are fully satiated by the shade of those lotus feet. The consciousness cannot possibly become attached to family members. The distinction between family life and spiritual life can be experienced by any person who has undergone the tribulations of living with a family. One who comes under the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord never becomes attracted by the activities of family life. One gives up lower engagement when he experiences a higher taste. Thus, one becomes detached from family life as soon as he comes under the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. The king continued, O great Brahmin, this is my great doubt. How is it possible for a person like King Priyavrata, who was so attached to wife, children, and home, to achieve the topmost infallible perfection in Krishna consciousness? Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, what you have said is correct. The glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is praised in eloquent, transcendental verses by such exalted personalities as Brahma, are very pleasing to great devotees and liberated souls. One who is attached to the nectarine honey of the Lord's lotus feet, and whose mind is always absorbed in his glories, may sometimes be checked by some impediment, but he still never gives up the exalted position he has acquired. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, there are two kinds of impediments to devotional service. The first is an offense at the lotus feet of a Vaishnava aparad. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu warned his devotees not to commit Vaishnava aparad, which he described as mad elephant offense. You just picture it, mad elephant. I mean, elephants are huge. Elephant goes into a rage, destroys everything. Mad elephant. You just see it stomping around, screeching. It's not funny. It's quite a picture. It's quite a sight. When a mad elephant enters a beautiful garden, it destroys everything, leaving a barren field. Similarly, the power of Vaishnava aparad is so great that even an advanced devotee becomes almost devoid of his spiritual assets if he commits it. Since Krishna consciousness is eternal, it cannot be destroyed altogether, but advancement may be checked for the time being. Thus, Vaishak aparad is one kind of impediment to devotional service. Sometimes, however, the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotee desires to impede one's devotional service. For example, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha were formerly Jai and Vijay, the gatekeepers of Vaikuntha, but by the desire of the Lord they became his enemies for 3 lives. Thus, the desire of the Lord is another kind of impediment. But in both cases, the pure devotee, once advanced in Krishna consciousness, cannot be lost. Following the orders of his superiors, Swayambhuva and Lord Brahma, Priyavrata accepted family life, but this did not mean that he lost his position in devotional service. Krishna consciousness is perfect and eternal, therefore it cannot be lost under any circumstances. Because the material world is full of obstructions to advancement in Krishna consciousness, there may appear to be many impediments. Yet Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, declares in Bhagavad Gita, Kaunteya Pratijanahi Name Bhakta Pranasyati. Once one has taken shelter at the lotus feet of Krishna, he cannot be lost. In this verse, the word Shiva Tatmam is very significant. Shiva Tatamam means the most auspicious. The devotional path is so auspicious that a devotee cannot be lost under any circumstances. This is described in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita by the Lord himself. My dear Arjuna, for a devotee, there is no question of being lost, either in this life or in the next. By the order of the Lord, a perfect devotee sometimes comes to this material world like an ordinary human being. Because of his previous practice, such a perfect devotee naturally becomes attached to devotional service, apparently without cause. Despite all kinds of impediments due to surrounding circumstances, he automatically perseveres in devotional service and gradually advances until he once again becomes perfect. Bilvamangala Thakur had been an advanced devotee in his previous life, but in his next life he became greatly fallen and was attached to a prostitute. Suddenly, however, his entire behavior was changed by the words of that very prostitute who had so much attracted him, and he became a great devotee. In the lives of exalted devotees, there are many such instances, proving that once one has taken to the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, he cannot be lost. Kaunteya Pratijanahi Name Bhakta Pranasyati. The fact is, however, that one becomes a devotee when he completely freed from all reactions to sinful life. Yesham tvantagatam papam jnanam punyakaramandam tedvanda moha nirmukta bhajante mam dridhavata. Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, whose sinful actions are completely eradicated, who are freed from the duality of illusion, engage themselves in my service with determination. Matirna Krishne Parata Svatova Mito Bipadyeta Grihavratanam. As Prahlad Maharaj says, a person who is too attached to materialistic family life, home, family, wife, children, and so on, cannot develop Krishna consciousness. These apparent contradictions are resolved in the life of a devotee by the grace of the Supreme Lord, and therefore a devotee is never bereft of his position on the path of liberation, which is described in this verse as Shivatatmam Padavim. Sukadeva Goswami continued, "My dear king, Prince Priyavrata was a great devotee because he sought the lotus feet of Narada, his spiritual master, and thus achieved the highest perfection in transcendental knowledge. With advanced knowledge, he always engaged in discussing spiritual subjects, did not divert his attention to anything else. The prince's father then asked him to take charge of ruling the world. He tried to convince Priyavrata that this was his duty as indicated in the revealed scriptures. Prince Priyavrata, however, was continuously practicing bhakti yoga by constantly remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead, thus engaging all his senses in the service of the Lord. Therefore, although the order of his father could not be rejected, the prince did not welcome it. Thus, he very conscientiously raised the question of whether he might be diverted from devotional service by accepting the responsibility of ruling over the world. These are important verses. Read the propounds on these. Srila Narottam Das Thakur has sung, Chadiya Vaishnava Seva, Nishtara Payecha Keba. Without serving the lotus feet of a pure Vaishnav or spiritual master, no one has ever attained perfect liberation from material bondage. Let's try that again. Without serving the lotus feet of a pure Vaishnav or spiritual master, no one has ever attained perfect liberation from material bondage. Prince Priyavrata regularly served the lotus feet of Narada, and thus the prince perfectly understood transcendental subjects in truth. Satattva. The word Satattva means that Priyavrata knew all the facts about the spirit soul, Supreme Personality of Godhead, the relationship between the spirit soul and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he also knew all about this material world and the relationship of the spirit soul and the Supreme Lord within the material world. Thus, the prince decided to engage himself only in rendering service to the Lord. When Priyavrata's father, Swayambhuva Manu, requested him to accept the responsibility of ruling over the world, he did not welcome the suggestion. This is the symptom of a great liberated devotee. Even though engaged in worldly affairs, he did not take pleasure in them, but remains always absorbed in the Lord's service. While thus serving the Lord, he deals externally with worldly affairs without being affected. For example, although he has no attraction for his children, he cares for them and educates them to become devotees. Similarly, he speaks to his wife with affectionate words, but he's not attached to her. By rendering devotional service, a devotee acquires all the good qualities of the Supreme Lord. Lord Krishna had 16,000 wives, all of them very beautiful, and although he dealt with each of them as a beloved husband, he was not attracted or attached to any of them. In the same way, although a devotee may enter family life and act very affectionately toward his wife and children, he's never attached to these activities. This verse states that by serving the lotus feet of his spiritual master, Prince Priyavrata very soon attained the perfectional stage of Krishna consciousness. This is the only way to advance in spiritual life. Yasya deve parabhaktir yata deve tata guru tasyaite katita yata prakashante mahatmana. If one has unflinching faith in the Supreme Lord and the spiritual master, the essence of all Vedic knowledge is revealed to him. A devotee always thinks of the Lord continuously. While chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, the words Krishna and Hari immediately remind him of the Lord's activities. Since his entire life is engaged in the service of the Lord, the devotee cannot forget the Lord at any time. Just as an ordinary man always engages his mind in material activities, a devotee always engages his mind in spiritual activities. This is called Brahma Sutra, or meditating upon the Supreme Lord always. Since Prince Priyavrata was perfectly initiated into this practice by Sri Narada. Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued, the first created being and most powerful demigod in this universe is Lord Brahma, who is always responsible for developing universal affairs. Born directly from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he dedicates his activities to the welfare of the entire universe, for he knows the purpose of the universal creation. This supremely powerful Lord Brahma, accompanied by associates and the personified Vedas, left his own abode in the highest planetary system and descended to the place of Prince Priyavrata's meditation. As Lord Brahma descended on his carrier, the great swan, all the residents of the planets named Siddhaloka, Gandharvaloka, Satyaloka, Charanaloka, as well as great sages and demigods flying in their different airplanes, assembled within the canopy of the sky to receive Lord Brahma and worship him. As he received respect and adoration from the residents of the various planets, Lord Brahma appeared just like the full moon, surrounded by illuminating stars. Lord Brahma's great swan then arrived at the border of Gandhamadana Hill and approached Prince Priyavrata, who was sitting there. Lord Brahma, the father of Narada Muni, is the supreme person within this universe. As soon as Narada saw the great swan, he could understand that Lord Brahma had arrived. Therefore, he immediately stood up, along with Swayambhuva Manu and his son Priyavrata, whom Narada was instructing. Then they folded their hands and began to worship Lord Brahma with great respect. My dear King Parikshit, because Lord Brahma had finally descended from Satyaloka to Burloka, Narada Muni, Prince Priyavrata, and Swayambhuva Manu came forward to offer him objects of worship and to praise him in highly qualified language, according to Vedic etiquette. At that time, Lord Brahma, the original person of this universe, felt compassion for Priyavrata, and looking upon him with a smiling face, spoke to him as follows. That Lord Brahma descended from Satyaloka to see Priyavrata indicates that the matter was very serious. Narada Muni had come to advise Priyavrata about the value of spiritual life, knowledge, renunciation, and bhakti. And Lord Brahma knew that Narada's instructions were very impressive. Therefore, unless Lord Brahma personally went to Gandhamadana Hill to request Priyavrata, Lord Brahma knew that Prince Priyavrata would not accept his father's order. Brahma's purpose was to break Priyavrata's determination. Therefore, Brahma first looked upon Priyavrata with compassion. His smile and compassionate features also indicated that although Brahma would request Priyavrata to accept householder life, Priyavrata would not be out of touch with devotional service. By the blessings of a Vaishnava, everything is possible. This is described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as Kripa Siddhi, a perfection attained simply by the blessings of a superior person. One usually becomes liberated and perfect by executing regulative principles set down in the Shastras. Nonetheless, many persons have achieved perfection simply by the blessings of a spiritual master or a superior. Priyavrata was the grandson of Lord Brahma, and as joking competition sometimes takes place between grandson and grandfather, in this case, also Priyavrata was determined to remain in meditation, whereas Brahma was determined that he ruled the universe. Thus, Lord Brahma's affectionate smile and glance meant, "My dear Priyavrata, you have decided not to accept household life, but I have decided to convince you that you must accept it." Actually, Brahma had come to praise Priyavrata for his high standard of renunciation, austerity, penance, and devotion, so that he would not be deviated from devotional service, even though he would accept household life. In this verse, one important word is Shukta Vakena by Vedic hymns. In the Vedas, there is the following prayer to Lord Brahma. I'm not going to read it because I'm not familiar with it and I'll just stumble over it. But there's a prayer here in Sanskrit. Brahma was received with the appropriate Vedic hymns. Because he was welcomed according to the Vedic etiquette, he was very pleased. Lord Brahma, the Supreme Person within this universe, said, "My dear Priyavrata, kindly hear attentively what I shall say to you. Do not be jealous of the Supreme Lord, who is beyond our experimental measures. All of us, including Lord Shiva, your father, and the great sage Maharshi Narada, must carry out the order of the Supreme. We cannot deviate from his order. When Lord Brahma went to induce Priyavrata to accept the responsibility for ruling the universe, he did not go whimsically. He was following the dictations of the Supreme Lord. Indeed, Brahma and other genuine authorities never do anything without his permission. Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart. In the beginning of the Bhagavatam, it is said, Tene Brahma Rida Yadikaviye. The Lord dictated Vedic knowledge to Brahma through the heart. The more a living entity is purified by devotional service, the more he comes in direct contact with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvikam dadami buddhi yogam tam yenamam upayanti te. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. Lord Brahma, therefore, had not come to Priyavrata by his own whims. Rather, it is understood that he had been ordered to persuade Priyavrata by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose activities cannot be understood by material senses, and who is therefore described herein as aprameya. Thus, Lord Brahma first advised Priyavrata to hear his words with attention, without envy. why one is induced to perform certain acts despite his desire to do something else is indicated herein. One cannot disobey the orders of the Supreme Lord, even if one is as powerful as Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, Manu, or the great sage Narada. All these authorities are certainly very powerful, but they do not have the power to disobey the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Since Lord Brahma had come to Priyavrata in accordance with the orders of the Supreme Lord, he first wanted to dispel any suspicion that he might be acting as Priyavrata's enemy. Lord Brahma was following the order of the Supreme Lord, and therefore it would be worthwhile for Priyavrata to accept Lord Brahma's orders as the Lord desired. One cannot avoid the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not by the strength of severe austerities, an exalted Vedic education, the power of mystic yoga, physical prowess, intellectual activities. Nor can one use his power of religion, his material opulence, or any other means, either by himself or with the help of others, to defy the orders of the Supreme Lord. It's not possible for any living being, from Brahma down to the ant. In the Garga Upanishad, Gargamuni says to his wife, "My dear Gargi, everything is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even the sun, the moon, and other controllers and demigods like Lord Brahma and King Indra are all under his control. An ordinary human being or animal who has accepted a material body cannot go beyond the jurisdiction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's control. A material body includes senses. However, the sense activities of so-called scientists who try to be free from God's law or the laws of nature are useless. Mama Maya Duratyaya. It is impossible to surpass the control of material nature, for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is working behind it. Sometimes we are proud of our austerities, our penances, mystic yogic powers, but it is clearly stated herein that one cannot surpass the laws and directions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, either by dint of mystic power, scientific education, austerities, and penances. It is impossible." The word manisaya, by intelligence, is of special significance. Priyavrata might argue that Lord Brahma was requesting him to accept family life and responsibility for ruling a kingdom, although Narada Muni had advised him not to enter household life and be entangled in material affairs. Whom to accept would be a puzzle for Priyavrata, because both Lord Brahma and Narada Muni are authorities. Under the circumstances, the use of the word manisya is very appropriate, for it indicates that since both Narada Muni and Lord Brahma are authorized to give instruction, Priyavrata should neglect neither of them, but should use his intelligence to follow the advice of both. To solve such dilemmas, Rupa Goswami has given a very clear conception of intelligence. He says, "Anashaktasya vishayan yatarham upayunjta nirbandha krishna sambandhe yukta vairagyam uchate." Visayan, material affairs, should be accepted without attachment, and everything should be dovetailed with the service of the Lord. That is real intelligence, manisha. Becoming a family man or king in the material world is not harmful if one accepts everything for Krishna's service. That necessitates clear intelligence. Mayavadi philosophers say, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. This material world is false, and only the absolute truth is real. However, an intelligent devotee in the line of Lord Brahma and the great sage Narada, or in other words, in the Brahma Sampradaya, does not consider this world false. That which is created by the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be false, but using it for enjoyment is. Everything is meant to be enjoyed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as confirmed in Gita, Bhoktaram Yagnatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Proprietor and Enjoyer. Therefore, everything should be dovetailed for his enjoyment and service. Regardless of one's circumstances, favorable or unfavorable, one should use everything to serve the Supreme Lord. That is the perfect way to use one's intelligence. Wow, that's a beautiful, beautiful purport. King Priyavrata's dilemma. Should I follow the instruction of Narada Muni, or should I follow the instruction of Lord Brahma? They're both good instructions. And then Rupa Goswami is able to combine the two, just like Priyavrata was able to combine the two, to engage in the activities of the world without being attached. But that is real renunciation. So that makes you question, what is the actual essence of sannyas? Because the Mayavad, or impersonal conception, is to reject everything. Don't use anything, just reject it. It's all false. Just think about the one spiritual nature. So, Vaishnava sannyas is not for the purpose of rejecting everything. It's for the purpose of avoiding using one's time in the affairs of the world, so that one can use one's time to spread the message of Godhead, be free to travel around. So the two conceptions of sannyas are very different. The Mayavadi sannyas is very different from the Vaishnava sannyas. So we have the different dandas that the sannyasis carry. One, the Mayavad danda, is just a single staff, and the Vaishnava danda has three little, it's a staff, but it has three small branches at the top: body, mind, and words, dedicated to the service of the Lord. That's why a devotee who is serving in the household situation is also renounced, because he's using body, mind, and words to serve Krishna. So they're both sannyas. And then there's that instruction that in this age of Kali Yuga, no one should take the sannyas order, but to serve in household life, be renounced from that position, which makes a lot of sense, because the varnashram system is so covered over and, practically speaking, non-functional in the world. To take sannyas officially, very difficult. Real sannyas, very, very difficult to do, because there's no support of the other ashrams are there to support the sannyasi. He doesn't have to worry about his food. He doesn't have to worry about his shelter. Those things are supplied so that he is free to move. But in the present age, There's very little support like that for the sannyasi. That's interesting. Hare Krishna. Next verse. My dear Priyavrata, by the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all living entities accept different types of bodies for birth and death, activity, lamentation, illusion, fear of future dangers, and happiness and distress. My dear boy, all of us are bound by the Vedic injunctions to the divisions of varnashram according to our qualities and work. These divisions are difficult to avoid because they are scientifically arranged. We must therefore carry out our duties of varnashram dharma, like bulls obliged to move according to direction of a driver, pulling on ropes knotted to their noses. My dear Priyavrata, according to our association with different modes of material nature, the Supreme Personality of Godhead gives us our specific bodies and the happiness and distress we achieve. We must therefore remain situated as He is and be conducted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, exactly as a blind man is led by a person who has eyes with which to see. By material means, one cannot avoid the happiness and distress unique to his particular body. There are 8,400,000 bodily forms, each destined to enjoy and suffer a certain amount of happiness and distress. This we cannot change, for the happiness and distress are ordained by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in accordance with whose decision we have received our bodies. Since we cannot avoid the plan of the Supreme Godhead, we must agree to be directed by Him, just as a blind man is led by a person who has eyes. Under any circumstances, if we remain in the condition allotted to us by the Supreme Lord and follow His instructions, we will become perfect. The main purpose of life is to follow the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is such instructions that constitute one's religion or occupational duty. Krishna says, Sarvadharman parityajam mamekam saranam pracha. Give up all other engagements. Simply surrender unto me. Follow me. This process of surrendering by following the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not meant for any particular caste or creed. A Brahmin can surrender, a Kshatriya, a Vaishya, a Sudra. Everyone can adopt this process as stated in this verse. One should follow the Lord the way a blind man follows a person who has eyes. If we follow the Supreme Personality of Godhead by following the directions He gives in the Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, our lives will be successful. Therefore, the Lord says, Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyajimam namaskaru mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijane priyosine. Always think of me. Become my devotee. Offer respect and obeisances unto me. Then you will certainly come back home, back to Godhead. I promise you this because you're my very dear friend. This instruction is meant for everyone, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra. If anyone from any division of life surrenders to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, follows His instructions, his life will be successful. The previous verse has given the analogy of bulls moving under the direction of the driver of a bullock cart. The bulls, being completely surrendered to the driver, remain wherever he wants to place them and eat whatever he wants them to eat. Similarly, being completely surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we should not aspire for happiness or regret distress. We must be satisfied with the position allotted to us by the Lord. We should follow the path of devotional service and not be dissatisfied with the happiness and distress he has given. People in the material modes of passion and ignorance generally cannot understand the plan of the Supreme Personality of Godhead with its 8,400,000 forms. But the human form affords one the special privilege to understand this plan, engage in devotional service, elevate oneself to the highest position of perfection by following the Lord's instructions. The entire world is working under the influence of the modes of material nature, especially ignorance and passion. But if people engage in hearing and chanting about the glories of the Supreme Lord, their lives can be successful. They can be elevated to the highest perfection. Harinam, Harinam, Harinama eva kevalam. Kalo nasteva, 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 gatiranyata. In this age of Kali, there's no other way, no other way, no other way for spiritual perfection than the holy name, the holy name, the holy name of the Lord. Everyone should be given the chance to hear the holy names of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for thus one will gradually come to understand his real position in life and be elevated to the transcendental position above the mode of goodness. Thus, all impediments to his progress will be cut to pieces. In conclusion, therefore, we must be satisfied in whatever position we have been put into by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We should try to engage ourselves in his devotional service. Then our lives will be successful. Haribo, 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 Haribo. Take a little break here. Jai. Srila Prabhupada. Jai. Shri Krishna Chaitanya.